This is my post-fight video for Gennady Golovkin versus David Lemieux. I'm struggling with a bit of a cold at present, as you can probably hear, so apologies if the sound quality isn't great, if I'm sounding a bit nasal. It's also why I didn't do videos yesterday covering the Sky stuff. It wasn't the greatest show in the world, the Sam Eglinton card, so I'm kind of going to part that one and not bother because, as I say, I haven't been feeling at my best recently. Before I get into this fight, do give me a follow on Twitter, @BoxingGossip. I'm going to become more and more active on Twitter, try and help grow out the channel. Let's talk Golovkin and Lemieux. Firstly, I want to throw my hat into the ring when it comes to the stoppage. I watched The Wire's video. He said that the stoppage was a ridiculous stoppage. I wholeheartedly agree with him. I'm not taking anything away from Golovkin, by the way. I'll come on to that in a minute. But this was a very, very, very poor stoppage. David Lemieux, he was losing every round, but he was getting beaten as well. He was losing every round badly, but he wasn't getting knocked out. Dwyer made reference to the referee bringing in the doctor to check he had a bust nose. I'm no doctor, but I could have told you that was a bust nose. It's like. The referee, I can understand what he was trying to do. Obviously, one man wasn't competitive, one man was taking a beating. But this is a world title shot. This is I think it was a world title unification match, actually. This is as big as it gets. And Lemieux was still in there. He was throwing. He was fighting back. He wasn't about to get knocked out. He'd been dropped earlier on for a body shot and he'd recovered from that. I think it was a very, very poor stoppage. Having said that, whilst the stoppage was very poor, and whilst Lemieux should have had a chance to go another round or two, maybe he could have landed something, realistically it wouldn't have changed the way of this fight. This was a dominant win from Golovkin. It was a very one-sided fight. We'll come to that, I keep saying this, we'll come to that in just 1 second. The second thing I wanted to talk about before we get started, apart from the stoppage, Lemieux's haircut. Absolutely ridiculous at this level of sport that we're talking about something like a haircut, And genuinely it was getting in his way, wasn't it? His long hair was drooping down with the sweat and he was wiping it out of his eyes. What that meant was that there were times he wasn't concentrating on fighting. There were times his hands were in places they shouldn't be. It was obviously a serious distraction. Now, obviously, Lemieux sparred for this fight. Maybe he's wearing headgear or something, but either way, I'm sure he's exercised very hard and sweated up heavily in the beginning of this fight. And he must have known that this was going to be a problem. I know he wants to be a good-looking guy and maybe he wants a second career in modelling, but that's so poor, At this level of the sport, when you're fighting for this level of prize, you can't let the haircut be a factor whatsoever. He'd have been well off just to have gone into his barber's and got a one all over. But anyway, those are two asides. I wanted to mention the stoppage, I wanted to mention the haircut. Let's talk about the actual fight. Very, very one-sided. To my disappointment, Lemieux actually caused Golovkin less problems than Martin Murray. I think it's arguable that Lemieux caused Golovkin less problems than Curtis Stevens. This was a one-sided fight to the extreme. And let me say, I've been very, very, very dubious over Gennady Golovkin in the past on my channel. This was his best performance to date by far, in my estimations. This was his most professional performance that I have seen by a long, long way. He completely negated David Lemieux's game. He was much more reserved than I've seen him in previous fights. Maybe he was more wary of Lemieux's power. Maybe against Willie Monroe and Martin Murray, he knew that they couldn't hurt him, so he was more inclined to throw caution to the wind. But we saw a much more disciplined, reserved performance today from Gennady Golovkin. The jab was in effect from early on and it was working very, very nicely. There's a very accurate, hard jab. And people talk about Golovkin having a good jab, but I've never seen him jab so well as he did in this fight. Typically, I kind of see his jab as a way of controlling the distance, but in this fight it was a battering ram and it was actually busting up his opponent and doing a fairly sound job of it. The jab was a major, major weapon in this fight, and I think a very, very telling factor. Secondly, Golovkin's defensiveness. Lemieux was swinging wildly at times and just lunging in and hoping. And Golovkin's defensive movement was really good, really good. You see him take a step back, glide out of range. You know, it's not that his defence was... He didn't have some sort of James Toney defence where he was rolling and swerving all over the place. He was just moving forwards and backwards very, very nicely. And his footwork and his pedigree in that sense was enough to keep him out of range of Lemieux. You know, the combination of the jab being a bit of a battering ram and the backwards foot movement was simply enough to negate David Lemieux's game. The power was on show. You know, you saw him drop Lemieux in the 5th round with a peach of a hook. Yeah, the power was always there. I thought Lemieux stood up to his power slightly better than I had anticipated. I had some major questions over Lemieux's durability. You know, but Golovkin put those to bed. I mean, Lemieux did a fair chance. I think that was possibly because Golovkin was more disciplined and more jabbing and moving as opposed to previous fights where we've just seen him smash opponents out of the park, so we say. So that was that. I think my question here is, for me, this fight showed David Lemieux's limitations as a fighter completely. And this is credit to Golovkin. This isn't to Golovkin's detriment. Golovkin was able to expose these gaps in Lemieux's game because Lemieux had no answer to Golovkin. But Lemieux had no ability to dodge the jab. He had no ability to get in range, get out of range, go low, you know. He was just a sitting target for the jab. He stood at the wrong kind of range. And when his plan A wasn't working, and I think I'm being charitable even calling it a plan A because there wasn't much of a plan, there was no sort of plan B, there was no versatility, there was no sort of second level, you know, to his game. And what he resorted to was swinging from range, trying to catch Golovkin with something wild. What he didn't do, which is what I'd have liked to see him do, and this is again credit to Gennady Golovkin, is rather than just standing out of range and flailing wildly with an inaccurate hook, I'd have liked to have seen him desperately trying to get inside and trying to put Golovkin more onto his back foot and try and fight up close, you know, try and be a metre or two, a foot away from Golovkin at most, you know. That's where I think it would have been interesting. Now, the reason he couldn't do that was because Golovkin's movement was too advanced and Golovkin's jab was too good. But I'd have liked to have seen him force the issue. You know, I saw Lemieux as the bigger man slightly. And whilst Golovkin's jab was very, very painful and difficult and hard to deal with, it wasn't a knockout shot. You know, I'd have liked to have seen Lemieux go in a bit harder. I'd have liked to have seen him maybe take a few jabs in order to get in position and try and pin Golovkin backwards and cause him problems on that way. But he was unable to. You know, Golovkin's jab was too effective, Golovkin's movement was too effective, and all in all, it was just too much of a puzzle for Lemieux to fix. Yeah, for me, I've often been critical about Golovkin's level of opposition, and I still have some concerns over it. But I often have said in previous videos, name me one top 5 middleweight Golovkin's beaten. Well, now I think the matter is laid to bed. Golovkin has beaten a top 5 middleweight, and the way he beat David Lemieux is more impressive than any other form in the middleweight division. You know, Peter Quillen hasn't beaten an opponent like that. Miguel Cotto hasn't beaten an opponent at middleweight like that. Danny Jacobs hasn't beaten an opponent at middleweight like that. You know, not a top 5 level opponent at any rate. You know, this was a top performance from Golovkin, and for me, having seen this fight, I think now Golovkin is on the verge of, well, he's certainly a pound for pound top 10 fighter having seen this. There's still big challenges out there for him. You know, Miguel Cotto, Canelo, Quillen, these guys are probably even a level higher than Lemieux. But he's operating against elite level opponents and he's destroying them. You know, he's giving a boxing clinic. To be honest, even if you'd taken away his power last night, he would have still schooled David Lemieux. So it's a very, very impressive performance from Golovkin. A career peak in terms of the pro rings. It moves him up drastically in my estimations. And I do look forward to the fights with Peter Quillen, Peter Quillen and Cotto and Canelo and those sort of guys if they can be made. At this stage, to my mind, Golovkin is a favourite in all of them, having seen this piece of form. I think the only way you can beat him, well, I'd be interested in a guy like Peter Quillen, who I imagine is bigger and has a better reach. I'd be interested in him against Golovkin, or someone like Canelo, if he could duck inside the jab and pushing back and fighting the inside. Those are still interesting challenges, but as I say, at present, Golovkin is a favourite in all of those matchups. Let me know your thoughts even. How did you see the fight last night? How impressed were you in the performance? Thanks as always for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please do give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.